PEFC UK. My name is John Kirkby. For those that you don't know, I'm the Executive Director, National Secretary for PEFC UK. Delighted to be joined by Amber Scodro, National Systems Assessment Officer from PEFC International, who coordinates the PEFC International training programme. Really pleased that Amber is able to join us this afternoon. We had about 150 registered. We've got about 60 in the room now. Obviously, there could be quite a few questions, so Amber very kindly has offered to kind of manage the questions as we work through the webinar. So if you do have any questions as we go, then please pop them in the Q&A or the chat, and Amber will answer them as we go. There should be a short amount of time at the end of the webinar as well to ask any questions. So Daniela, you have your hand up? Or Daniela? You're still on mute, Daniela? If you did have a question. Okay.
Hi, sorry. Is this this will be translated into German or only for English?
It will just be this is being run by PEFC UK, so it will be in English. As
only
I said,
English.
This will just be in English. There will be a recording with a transcript available afterwards, which I'll send around to everybody who's attended and everybody who's registered. As I say, if after the course you do require any further clarification about anything that we've covered, then please do get in touch and we'll be happy to help as much as we can.
Okay.
Okay, so just a little bit of background and introduction to the guidance document, GD 2001. But today we're going to be going through the 2025 version of it. It contains a number of clarifications that are issued by the Chain of Custody Working Group. So the GD 2001 was first published in 2022. So over the last 3 years, as we've received clarification or requests for clarifications and questions about chain of custody requirements, these have been collated and some of them have been incorporated within this latest version of the guidance document. The guidance document was drafted by the Chain of Custody Working Group and then submitted for a members consultation. We'll talk about members, we talk about the national governing bodies, for example, PEFC UK, and the international stakeholder members. We were given the opportunity to provide comments, which were then fed back to the Chain of Custody Working Group, and then a final version of the document was produced and was approved by the PEFC International Board in May 2025. Just for the ease of the user, any new guidance in the document is highlighted in dark green, and any withdrawn guidance is in black but struck through. Any text, any guidance that is just in black is existing guidance that was present in the original document. In terms of some of the amendments to the guidance document, as well as the kind of technical clarifications that have been sought, also there's been a big piece of work going on with PEFC in terms of our alignment with EUDR. And this has seen a revision of the Sustainable Forest Management Standard, ST1003, and the guidance document clarifies some of the revised definitions within that standard and how they align with the Chain of Custody Standard, PEFC Standard 2002. Those affected definitions include forest conversion, forest plantation, and trees outside forest, which are now aligned with the EUDR definitions. In terms of the status of the guidance document, in terms of certificate holders, you are still certified and should be audited against the chain of custody standard, PFC standard 2002, and the trademark standard, PFC standard 2001. The certification bodies that are auditing you need to follow ISO 17065 requirements and the additional requirements in standard 2003 2020. Those three standards contain the normative references against which normative requirements, against which you're assessed. The guidance document simply provides what it says, guidance for certificate holders in terms of providing additional information of how they meet requirements, and also provides guidance for certification bodies as well. As I said, this version of the guidance document replaces the 2020 version of the guidance document in its entirety. The only bit of the guidance document, the previous guidance document, which is still valid, is the annex from the 2014 version of the guidance document, which covers project certification. That is still valid for now. However, currently PFC are looking at a revision of the project certification requirements, which are now going to be within a standalone standard. An inquiry draft is due shortly, and hopefully there'll be a public consultation on that in October with a view to launching the new project certification standard in May next year. I say I will send the slides. You should all have copies of the standards, but again, there are links here that can be followed. And again, if you go onto the PFC UK website, there is a specific resources section in which all the standards are available to download as well. In terms of just a summary of the guidance, the changes to the guidance. In terms of the chain of custody standard, ST 2002, there's been amendments to definitions, some clarifications around outsourcing, and again around identification of inputs and declaration of outputs. In terms of the due diligence requirements in Appendix 1 of the chain of custody standard, there's been some amendments to the list of indicators for significant risk, in particular around the environmental performance index. And there's some clarifications around in Appendix 2 of the chain of custody standard around the multi-site producer groups. I know Adam and Sean, I think, from the FENCERT group in the UK are on here. So yeah, that's something we'll go through later on. Also, due diligence system for trees outside forest material. That's a new chapter that's been added to the guidance document that covers specific requirements around the inclusion of TOF material within the chain of custody system. In terms of the certification body standard, ST 2003, there's a number of amendments. The main one is being around guidance for resource requirements, so the work experience and audit experience of auditors, and expansion of the background sectors that can be used as evidence of work experience and audit experience. In terms of the trademark standard, not too many amendments. Really, it's more examples of trademark use and instructions around uses of the label generator. But we'll go through these in more detail. Okay, so starting with the chain of custody standard and definitions. So in terms of there's been some amendments to definitions to align them with the amended Sustainable Forest Management Standard 1003. These cover forest, that's covered under 3.12 of the chain of custody standard, forest conversion under 3.15, plantation forest under clause 3.16, and trees outside forest in 3.40. These definitions, certainly forest conversion, plantation forest, are now more aligned with the EUDR definitions. Controversial sources, which is covered under 3.7. To aid the reader, there's now a separate guideline for each element of the controversial source definition. In relation to section 3.7a, which covers legality, this has been amended or expanded, taking into account the legality aspects of EUDR. So there's additional requirements around land use rights, including rights to harvest, environmental protection, taxes and fees based on legal requirements, protection of human rights under international law, and how that's ratified by the country in which the organisation operates, and then applicable legislation to people being present or people with rights to the area of production in terms of where the tree-based material originates from. So again, there's a bit of an expansion of this requirement. 3.22 in terms of our definition of other material. So this is other material. This is non-PEFC certified material that is going to be used within a PEFC system. So this is the material category which is used at the point at which that material is sourced by the organisation and before it's gone through a DDS. Just some clarification around this, in that in terms of other material, before using that other material as an input within the PEFC system, it needs to have gone through the PEFC the PEFC DDS in order that it can be classified as negligible risk, and then it can be classified as PEFC controlled sources within the system. Trees outside forests, an amendment to the definition here. Again, the current definition for trees outside forest is trees growing outside areas of nationally designated forest land. This has now been amended to trees growing outside areas of forest land. Such areas will normally be classified as other wooded land, agricultural use, or urban environment. So yeah, just to clarify for those that aren't aware, trees outside forest, the term relates to material that's situated outside designated forest land, so generally urban environments or agroforestry systems. There's now a mechanism where countries can develop a TOF standard and have it endorsed by PEFC, and that can then, material that's originated from certified areas can then be classified as PEFC certified and enter a PEFC system. Currently, there are 4, now maybe 5, nationally endorsed systems in India, UK, the Netherlands, and Portugal. I think France is very, very close, or may have received endorsement as well. Now, in terms of certificates, currently we have 1 certificate, that's for the city of Zwolle in the Netherlands, but there's increasing interest within the TOF sector. So in terms of acceptance of trees outside forest material into a system, again, there's additional clarification under the definition of TOF under 3.40. So for example of non-certified TOF material, so if a company receives timber from India without a claim, they're classified as other material. During the first step of the DDS, they will seek information from the supplier regarding whether the timber originates from controversial sources. If the supplier informs them that the timber is coming from a TOF area, then the company can proceed with the risk assessment. It'll be classified as other material. If it goes through the risk assessment in the same way that forest-based material does and comes out as low risk, it can be classified as PEFC controlled sources and enter the system. If there is material originating from a certified area, so if a company receives timber from India with a PEFC claim, their supplier informs them that the timber is coming from a TOF area. The validity of the certificate can be checked using the PEFC website in the same way that any chain of custody or forest management certificate can be checked. On the PEFC website, it's also possible to verify that the country has an endorsed TOF standard and the scope of that, whether it covers agroforestry and urban environments or just urban environments or agroforestry. In the UK, for example, our TOF standard just covers urban and peri-urban areas. So it is possible, as well as checking the validity of certificate, further assurance can actually be gathered from the national members pages, which shows whether they have an endorsed TOF standard or not. 3.29, just a slight clarification around the definition of customer. So the customer is classified as a customer at the point that they receive their claim from their supplier. The PEFC customer can be certified or uncertified. There is no stipulation of whether a customer needs to be certified or not. This is important when it comes to the sale of PEFC controlled source material, that there is no PEFC controlled sources claims can be made to any customer. There's a slight difference with the FSC system, when FSC controlled claims can only be made to customers that hold FSC certification themselves. PEFC product groups, again, there's some clarification around the definition of PEFC product groups under 3.30. So again, clarification that the organisation can establish the product groups in a way that's best suited to their operations, provided provided those product groups meet the definition of PEFC product group as it's stated under 3.30. At an output level, the organisation has to define their product categories to the lowest level possible. So if a company is a panel products manufacturer, they make particle board, OSB, and other particle board materials. They have to define each one of those products individually, because there is a separate classification for them within the PEFC product categories, as shown in the example here. At input level, again, clarifications provide that input level, there's no requirement to define the inputs against the product categories. So for example, here we've got the board manufacturer, their inputs are chips, post-consumer recycled wood, and pruning logs. Again, there is no normative requirement for those to be specified against the product categories, but just on the outputs. Recycled material, as defined under 3.35 of the chain of custody standard. Again, some clarification around what can be categorized as recycled material. So PEFC adopted the definition of recycled material from ISO 14021, with the idea being that material that's actually generated from a process, leaves a plant, and then is used as an input in another process at a separate plant, would fall into that recycled category. It wasn't intended to be used by organisations who recover material within one process in their factory and then use it within another. That material wouldn't be eligible to have a recycled claim against it. So again, just some clarification around the application of the recycled definition, and as an example given in the guidance on a cardboard box manufacturer. So here they're buying sheets of cardboard and using them to make cardboard boxes. During that manufacturing process, cuttings from the cardboard box manufacturing are produced. Those cuttings themselves cannot be used by the cardboard box manufacturer to make cardboard boxes, so they are returned to the producer of the cardboard sheets, where they can be used in the manufacture of other cardboard sheets. That kind of scenario, those cuttings would fall under PEFC's definition of recycled. Within the offsite producer, any waste from the production of the cardboard sheets that actually could be fed back into the production process cannot be classified as recycled. So again, there's just clearer definition on that within the under 3.35. A couple of other bits of clarifications under recycled material definition. So waste from private gardens, twigs, branches, can be considered as recycled material, provided that the certificate holder using that material can provide sufficient evidence to the certification body that shows it's originated in those private gardens and meets the definition of recycled material. Also, the term waste, which is detailed within the definition of recycled material, some clarification around how we are defining waste. And again, it can be understood as follows. So any substance or object which the holder discards or intends or is required to discard. Again, it's the definition we've used is from the EC directive, which is listed there. Okay, so that's definitions. Any questions around the definitions? In which case, we'll move on to outsourcing. So was there anything that comes through, Amber? Fine. So outsourcing, some additional clarification against clause 4.9. So if the outsourced company on the organisation's list of outsourced contractors hasn't been used since the last internal audit, then the organisation may be able to justify not including that outsourced contractor in the internal audit, in the next internal audit if they've not been used. However, what they must take into account is before they use the outsourcer again, whether an internal audit is required to reactivate them within their processes. That will be very much dependent upon the risk. Is it high risk or low risk outsourcing activity? Also, what needs to be taken into account, has there been any changes to the standards? National legislation, has there been a change of management ownership within the outsourcing company, change in staff, etc., that would basically need the organisation to verify again through internal audit that the outsourcer is able to provide the outsourced service. So again, there is a mechanism now where there's say no internal audit required if the outsource hasn't been used, but before they're used again, the organisation has to assess the risk and determine whether a reactivation audit is required. So clarification under 4.9. No change to the requirement. 4.9.1, the organisation may outsource activities covered by its PEFC chain of custody to another entity. However, there's just a clarification that the context of that clause should be understood as the organisation maintains the legal ownership of the materials during the outsource process. So the company that's providing the outsourced service does not take any legal ownership of the materials. If they do, then that should be considered as a supply chain and chain of custody requirements would apply. Under 4.9.2, again, just some clarification that if the organisation is outsourcing a process to another PEFC certified company, an outsourcing agreement still needs to be in place. Just to clarify, some of the previous guidance that if the organisation is outsourcing to a PEFC certified company whose scope of certification covers the process that's being outsourced to them, then an internal audit by the organisation isn't required. However, an outsourcing agreement always has to be in place. Also, some clarification of around sampling of outsourcers for internal audits. So when outsourced activities are conducted by multiple contractors, so it could be that a sawmill company employs 10 harvesting contractors. The internal audit can be conducted based on a sampling process in the same way that certification bodies use when they're sampling multi-site certificates. So if sampling can be done, then the minimum number of subcontractors for the internal audit should be the square root of the total number of subcontractors rounded up to the next whole number. So y, there we got the y equals the square root of x, where y is the number of contractors for the internal audit, and x is the total number of subcontractors. Additional requirements, at least 25% of the sample should be selected at random, and then the subcontract selection criteria should include a number of aspects, results of the internal audits or previous certification audits, records of any complaints against outsourcers, variations in the size of the contractors, the geographical dispersion of them, any changes to their operations since the last certification audit. So maybe that there is change of ownership, etc., which again may result in being considered to pose higher risk and again should be included in the standard. Then also subcontractors added since the last external audit. Just to clarify the last point, when it comes to adding a new outsourcer, that cannot be done on a sampling basis. So if a company was looking to employ 4 new outsourcers at the same time, each one of those outsourcers has to has to be covered by an internal audit. The sampling can only be applicable at the point of an ongoing annual internal audit. So identification of inputs and declaration of outputs, some clarification under 5.11 of the chain of custody standard. So documentation needs to be obtained when receiving inputs. Documentation needs to be obtained for each delivery. However, just some clarification that the documentation does not need to be obtained at the time of delivery. It could be received before, it could be received after. Again, though, all the information that's required in the 5.1 has to be stated on that documentation. The aim of this clarification is it allows certificate holders to pass on the PEFC claim more practically, particularly in the context of e-commerce. Obviously, as a certified organisation, if you're receiving the supplier's paperwork before delivery, that's great. There's low risk there. You can verify that the material is going to be delivered with a PEFC claim. Fantastic. Obviously, just be mindful that if you choose to accept material first and then receive documentation afterwards, just be mindful of the effect that if that documentation does not contain the PEFC chain of custody information, and it turns out the material wasn't supplied as certified, and you've already used it, there's a number of implications that you'd have to deal with in doing that. So, just something to bear in mind when using that clarification. And just as in terms of section 5.22, the organisation needs to specify the type of document in which the PEFC claims are being made and passed on. Again, the organisation needs to verify that or specify the types of documents they're using to check the input material. Just a bit of additional clarification as well in relation to 5.1.1a that requires on documentation received from a supplier, the supplier identification needs to be stated. In terms of receiving material from a multi-site certificate, as part of that supplier identification, it should also be clear what site the material is being received from, so that you can make sure that that site is covered under the scope of the multi-site certificate. And there we are. Sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. There's a slide covering that. Declaration of outputs. Again, some clarification under 5.2 of the standard. So just some clarification, wherever a PEFC certified organisation puts the PEFC on product label on a PEFC certified product they produce, they have to include the PEFC claim on the sales or delivery documentation. This again is clarified within the trademark standard as well. But what you can't have is a product labelled with the PEFC logo and then no claim being made on the documentation that's being supplied to the customer. Chain of custody methods. Again, clarification under 6.1. which is the introduction to the chain of custody methods within the standard. So again, just a previous clarification around material balances. Just to confirm as well, there is still no requirement for an annual volume summary for PEFC certification. However, previous guidance was during the audit, the balance between the material received and the material sold should be checked by the certification body. Again, just some clarification on this, that the balance between the material received and material sold should be checked, and that can be done at a product group level. So, for example, as an auditor, we will pick a number of samples of products that we'd look at. They would look at the inputs and outputs to those during the audit. So that verification of inputs and output balances can be done at the level of that product group based on the sample that is selected during the audit. Obviously, as a certificate holder, whilst you're not required to produce an annual volume summary that's submitted to the certification body, you do need to have the records in place that allows the certification body to verify that your inputs and outputs balance. Just some clarification under 6.1.1 as well, that talks about the 3 methods that are available. Just some clarification here that companies, they choose which chain of custody method they use for each product group. However, that chain of custody method has to be included within the scope of their certification. If the chain of custody method isn't included within the scope of their certification and they want to use it, then they should contact their certification body, who are likely to need to conduct a scope extension audit. That could be done on site, or it could be done remotely, depending on the operation. Again, 6.3.1 and 6.4.1 that cover the percentage and credit methods respectively. Whilst since the 2020 versions of the standard brought in, you've been able to use the percentage methods and the credit systems at the level of a multi-site, so across more than one site. This wasn't stated anywhere explicitly within the chain of custody standard or the guidance document. It is now. Under 6.3.1, the percentage method can be used at the level of multi-sites across more than one site. Likewise, under 6.4.1, the credit system can be used at the level of multi-sites across more than one site. Previously, it was covered under the definitions of product group and of the methods, in that the definition of product group states it could be used, the product group could be applied across more than one site, and the percentage and credit methods said that they had to be applied at the level of product group. So there was indirect confirmation that the percentage and credit systems could be used across site, but now this is clearly stated within the relevant sections of the guidance document. Due diligence system. So table 2, the list of indicators for significant risk of origin levels. This applies to other material that an organisation wants to use within a PEFC system. It has to go through a due diligence process to confirm its negligible risk from originating from controversial sources. Some changes to the to criteria A, or indicator A, sorry, activities where ecologically important forest areas are not identified, protected, conserved, or set aside. The criteria that's in the current Appendix 1 covers the EPI score for biodiversity and habitat. Requirement is for the country is lower than 50. This has now been changed. So the methodology that's used to determine environmental performance index has been changed significantly in 2024. Now, in addition to the biodiversity and habitat scores, the organisation also has available to them the protected area effectiveness and forest landscape integrity indexes that they're able to use as well. So as such, the requirement can now be read as the environmental performance index score for biodiversity and habitat, or for protective area effectiveness and forest landscape integrity of a country is lower than 50. And again, where no EPI index, that's the same as previous. So just some modification to that requirement based on changes to the EPIs. And again, there is links within the guidance as well to the source of the scores for under all 3 criteria. Multi-site organisations, so within Appendix 2. So again, some clarification under Clause 2.6 of Appendix 2 of the Chain of Custody Standard. So the idea behind producer groups is to allow certification for independent small companies under one certificate, so that they can share the cost and have a coordinator or a group manager that manages the certification and has the expertise to support the group members. The intent of this requirement wasn't to allow individual sites of larger companies to be part of producer groups. Therefore, 2.6 now clarifies that the entrance criteria for a group, which is less than 50 full-time employees or equivalent, and a turnover of less than 10 million euros or equivalent, applies to the company as a whole, not just at an individual site level. And also some clarification that organisations with more than one physical site are eligible to join producer groups, provided that the organisation on the whole complies with the entry thresholds of 50 full-time employees and less than 10 million euro turnover. If a company with multiple sites enter as a group, then each of the sites needs to be considered as a participant of the producer group. So additional guidance on the implementation of PEFC due diligence for TOF. So a new chapter has been added to the guidance document. So under Appendix 1 of the chain of custody standard, that covers the due diligence requirements. It is aimed solely at forest-based material. So it refers to forests throughout in terms of the risk criteria. Obviously, trees outside forest definition, forest doesn't apply to it. So again, a new section added to the guidance document for DDS in respect of TOF, which now talks about trees outside forest rather than forest itself. So in terms of TOF management rather than forest management, TOF management practices rather than forestry management practices. So all the terminology within the due diligence has been aligned with TOF. So, for example, list of indicators for negligible risk. So criteria A in the Appendix 1 talks about suppliers declared as certified against a forestry certification scheme. Obviously, forestry certification schemes don't tend to apply to TOF, so that's now been modified. So against a related certification system that covers material eligible for PEFC certification. Again, under C.4, it would talk under the current DDS in Appendix 1, the chain of custody standard, it would talk about the area of forest supply origin. This has now been changed to TOF. You get the idea, and so on and so forth. Again, the references to forestry have been changed to TOF. So that's the chain of custody standard. Moving on to the certification body standard. So really the main changes here are new clarifications on working experiences and audit experience for auditors to be qualified as PEFC chain of custody auditors and to maintain their qualifications as an auditor. So in terms of working experiences, so working experience for initial qualification of an auditor. For the first qualification of an auditor, the certification body needs to ensure the auditor has a minimum of 3 years full-time related working experience in the forest and/or tree-based and related industries. This has now been extended to cover work experience in ISO 9001, 14001, or equivalent schemes in the forest and other land-based industries as well. So slight expansion of the scope under which auditors can qualify. And again, audit experience. So the number currently the requirement is the number of chain of custody audits in training can be reduced to 2 PEFC chain of custody audits for auditors that are qualified for chain of custody standards, ISO 9001 or ISO 14001 in forest and tree related sectors. Again, this has been now modified, so it's not only in the forest sector but also in other land-based certification systems. And again, in terms of audit experience for maintaining the qualification as a PEFC lead auditor, the requirement currently is that there's a minimum of 5 external audits in chain of custody standards, ISO 9001, 14001 in forest and tree-based and related sectors per year. Again, the audit experience can cover experience in equivalent schemes and not only in the forest, but also in other land-based certification schemes. And again, just some additional clarification here around feedback mechanisms that certification bodies should have in place and be available to affected stakeholders and rights holders. Again, the guidance is added to reflect some of the additions to the forest management standard, which has a clear definition of affected stakeholders and incorporating definition of those as a stakeholder who might experience a direct change in living and or working conditions caused by implementation of a standard, or a stakeholder who might be a user of a standard and therefore is subject to the requirements of the standard. So this has now been incorporated into the guidance document to provide further clarification on who those stakeholders and rights holders are that the certification body should be listening to. Just a clarification under 7.4.5 and the audit. There's a guideline here that the presence of PEFC certified raw material is not mandatory when audits take place. So it's perfectly acceptable for a new certificate holder or a potential certificate holder to have their main assessment from the certification body before they've taken receipt of any PEFC certified material. Also, we also acknowledge the point there was a number of certificate holders who are traders, maybe even without physical possession. They don't have any physical possession of materials at the point at which they receive their main assessment. In terms of product groups, so certification documentation, for clarification under 7.7.2, that it's the organisation who needs to identify the product groups they want to be covered by the PEFC chain of custody. They need to use the PEFC product categories to define their product groups. But like we said when we're talking about 3.40 or the product group definition under the chain of custody standard, it is up to the organisation to determine their product groups and ensure that they're in line with the definition of product groups under the chain of custody standard. So during the audit, the certification body is required then to assess the list of product groups and ensure that the product categories have been used correctly, and then obviously the certification body will ensure those codes will be placed on the certificate, and they will also go onto the database. Just some clarification around certificate numbers and the formatting of certificate numbers. This is under 7.74. Just confirm that the dash between the elements of the certificate is required. So those four elements are the prefix of the certification body marker, then the dash, PEFC-COC, and then the numerical number that's assigned by the certification body. So in the case of certification body and certificate holder still using the slash between the elements, that should be changed to the dash. So the dash is now the mandatory requirement. And also just some clarification for certification bodies that on the certificate number, the COC should be written in all uppercase. In terms of process requirements, under 7.9.1, the frequency of surveillance audits, the requirement is that surveillance audits need to be conducted annually with no less than 9 months or no more than 15 months between audits. There is a note in there now as well that surveillance audit can be earlier than 9 months from the previous audit, provided that the requirement of 4 surveillance audits between the initial certification and the recertification was respected, and any outstanding non-conformities from the previous audit should be closed before the surveillance audit take place. And if an earlier surveillance audit leads to a moving forward of the recertification audit, then the valid from and expiry dates of the reissued certificate need to move forward accordingly. So again, there's clarification on this now within the standard. Appendix 3, multi-site certification. Again, in terms of just some clarification that minor non-conformities in a recertification from multi-site, whether they're raised at site level or central office level, do not stop the certificate from being reissued. obviously the proviso to that in the clarification is that the minor non-conformity is not a threat to the full multi-site exercise. I would hope in that circumstance anyway that if the auditor or certification body felt that the non-conformity presented a threat to the full multi-site, it would actually be raised as a major at that point and would have to be closed before the certificate was reissued. Just some clarification around sampling for on-site audits for multi-sites. So the central office function always needs to be audited and is not to be included within the sampling calculation. If the central office is one of the production sites, then the functions can be split for the sampling process. So if you've got a multi-site builders merchant, the central office is at one of the sites, then the actual operations of that site don't necessarily have to be visited every year, audited every year. The functions of that site can be split out into the central office function, which has to be audited every year, and then the actual operations at that site, the production operations, can then be sampled along with the rest of the participating sites. So yeah, just those are the changes to the certification body standard, not too many. In terms of the trademark standard, so the general scope of PEFC trademarks, they're defined under 5.1 of the trademark standard. It covers how the scope of the standard can be used, either on product by certificate holders under 5.1.1. 5.1.2 talks about off-product usage by certificate holders, and 5.1.3 talks about the use of the PEFC trademarks by non-certified companies to demonstrate or show their affiliation with PEFC. So it just gives some examples of the types of users that fall into that category. So it could be retailers who are procuring and selling PEFC certified and labeled products. It could be certification bodies that are offering PEFC certification. They have to use their logo on their certificates. And also organisations using finished PEFC certified products who can use the sign a promotional license to use the PEFC trademarks to demonstrate the fact that they're using PEFC certified inputs. In terms of PEFC trademarks and being used by companies that are certified to an endorsed system, so organisations that are certified against the PEFC endorsed chain of custody are allowed to use the PEFC trademarks for their certified material under the same conditions as for PEFC certified material. So, for example, here that's given in the guidance now is an organisation certified against the SGEC chain of custody standard, or, for example, the SFI chain of custody standard in North America. It can make PEFC chain of custody claims or apply the PEFC on product logo, provided they comply with the applicable requirements of standard 2002 and the trademark standard. Label generator, just some slight additional clarification to 6.1.2 that talks about or the requirement is that the PEFC logo and labels shall be obtained from the label generator. The guidance now includes a link to the label generator, which makes it easier for organisations to link straight to it. In terms of 6.2.4, so off-product PEFC trademarks use, some clarification around some guidance on how to achieve approval for this. So again, for the purposes of off-product PEFC trademark use, companies can approve a one-off or can seek a one-off usage. It's approved either by the PEFC Council or the national governing body. Again, the guidance now includes a link for organisations to use on how they can seek one-off approval. Again, just some examples under 6.2.5 of where PEFC labels can be used exceptionally without the licence number. Again, the requirement is it can be done, but it needs approval by the PEFC authorised body, either the PEFC Council or the national governing body. Again, approval should be sought through the label generator. So within the label generator that certificate holders have access to, there is an option on there to seek approval, and you can click onto that and actually upload the images of the artwork for the materials that you want to get approval for. The guidance now just includes a couple of examples of acceptable circumstances. It can be on business cards or on pencils, really where the size of the item that you want to put the logo on prevents the license number being placed on that in a form that it would be legible. Again, under 6.3.22, talking about requirements for Group B license holders. So Group B license holders are entities certified against a endorsed sustainable forest management standard. Under the Group B license, SFM certificate holders can only use the PEFC trademarks for off-product purposes. However, the guidance now just clarifies that the PEFC initials that are used for the purpose of passing on the PEFC claims are not classified as on-product usage. And again, we covered it under the chain of custody standard, but under 7.1.1.1, in terms of on-product, in order for a product to use the PEFC on-product label, the product needs to be sold with a PEFC claim on the supporting documentation. So certificate holders cannot simply put the PEFC logo on the product itself and then not make any claim on the associated documentation that goes to the customer. The label message, again, 7.1.2.1.3 provides examples of how the label message can be changed from what the standard this product is from sustainably managed forests and controlled sources to actually including the name of the product. So the examples given are this table is from sustainably managed forest, this brochure is from sustainably managed forest, and again all this packaging, and again the options, just for examples of the options that are available to certificate holders. Again, that flexibility is something that is worth investigating when you're generating labels for your products to ensure that the messaging on the label makes it clear what the label is referring to. In terms of use of the PEFC off-product label messages, those can be used on their own without the logo, provided they're accompanied by the license number. The reason for that is that license number provides that point of traceability where a company can verify that the organisation making that statement is covered by a valid trademark license or even valid certification. Just a couple of additional updates before we finish. Obviously, during COVID-19, a set of COVID-19 audit guidelines were produced for use by certification bodies. Those have now been revoked and no longer can be used.